Reverend Sharpton, thank you so much for the invitation. And I want to thank the entire National Action Network for having me. And more important, for the 30 years you've been keeping Dr. King's vision alive. I've been an economist for a long time. And one of the areas where I focused my attention is on the racial disparity in economic outcomes. It's probably because I started studying economics around the time Dr. King led the March on Washington. I was entering my freshman year in college, and it wasn't lost on me that the full name of the march was the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. The pursuit of civil rights and economic opportunity were deeply intertwined, and it was clear the country was failing on both counts. In fact, if you looked at the economic data from the year before the march, 1962, the average black family possessed roughly 15% of the wealth of the average white family. That's more than a 6-to-1 difference, and it's stark. But perhaps it isn't surprising. Jim Crow laws were still in effect in many places. What is surprising, though, is that it's now more than half a century later, and that 6-to-1 number has barely budged. Today, African Americans remain unemployed at roughly twice the rate of white Americans. And that number hasn't changed much in 50 years either. It's as close to a constant as you come in economic data. Indeed, if you somehow transported my college economics professor to 2021 and you only showed them the employment and the wealth numbers, they would have a hard time guessing that the country had passed the Civil Rights Act, or that we had elected our first black president, or our first black vice president. Instead, they might actually notice signs that the country had headed in the opposite direction, especially after 2008. During the last recession, the highest white unemployment ever reached was 9.2%. But black unemployment was trapped above 10% for 5 years. It reached 17%, and it hit its peak earlier and recovered slower than unemployment for almost any other group. That is what economic crises do. They hit people of color harder and longer. They push our country towards more inequality. This past year, we saw it happen again. During the early days of the pandemic, African Americans were the first to lose their small businesses and their jobs. And as the economy opens back up, early data suggests that black workers will be the last to be rehired. Will this pandemic be yet another generational setback for people of color? When I took office, I really worried that would be the case. We know that when the foundations of someone's life collapse, when they lose a small business or the roof over their head or the ability to eat dinner every night, it can weigh them down permanently. Their ability to earn is forever lowered. It's a phenomenon called economic scarring. I worried this would happen on a mass scale, especially in communities of color. But I do not think it will anymore. Last month, President Biden signed the American Rescue Plan, and I'm confident it provides enough relief for people to make it to the other side of this pandemic. In the end, it may still be true that the pandemic economy hit people of color harder, but I think the effects will be far milder than they would have been without the plan. But let me also say this. I know that's not enough. It's not sufficient that we just avoid an historic setback for Black Americans. On the other side of this crisis, we have to do more to unwind this sad, long history. the fact that for 50 years the economy has not worked well for communities of color, that we haven't yet lived up to Dr. King's vision. This is a profound economic and moral challenge. It's one I've cared about since I was in college, majoring in economics. And it's one I still care about now that I'm Treasury Secretary of the United States. For as long as I'm in this office, I want to work to make sure this economy works for everybody. I know we won't complete the job in my tenure, but my goal is that years from now, people see a difference. I do not know if any of you have children entering college or if they're studying economics, but my sincere hope is that by the time they are my age, and in fact well before that, they'll be able to look back at the economic data and see clear evidence that this country has made significant progress, and that progress started now. Thank you so much.